For a long time, Earth was known in the galaxy as the friendly planet. The people from other worlds often called it the kind one, a small world that always tried to make peace and help others. Whenever a conflict broke out between distant planets, Earth would send aid ships, doctors, and negotiators. They always tried to calm everyone down instead of joining the fight. To most of the galaxy, it looked like humans were too gentle to survive in a harsh universe. In the great halls of the Galactic Council, ambassadors from hundreds of worlds gathered every few months. The meetings were filled with noise, arguments, and endless debates about trade, borders, and technology. Among all these powerful empires, Earth's representative usually sat quietly, speaking only when asked. The humans had no mighty armies like the warrior races, and no grand fleets like the trading empires. They were just polite. Too polite, some thought. Many leaders from other planets laughed quietly when the human envoy spoke about peace. Some whispered that Earth was naive, that its kindness was a sign of weakness. Others felt pity. They believed humans were still learning how the galaxy truly worked. In their eyes, Earth was like a young child trying to talk in a room full of adults, but the humans never seemed offended. They smiled, nodded, and kept helping. They joined projects that repaired damaged planets, offered free energy research, and sent volunteers to rebuild after cosmic storms. Whenever another species faced disaster, humans were among the first to arrive, not with weapons but with helping hands. And yet, even with all that goodwill, something about Earth felt mysterious. They shared much but never everything. Their scientists always provided just enough technology to help others, but not enough for anyone to understand how it truly worked. Their trade routes were open but always well guarded. Their communications were friendly but carefully measured. It was as if there was a quiet line that no one was allowed to cross. Most ignored that detail. Why question kindness when it benefits you? For the Council, Earth's generosity was convenient. The humans cleaned up after wars they didn't start and repaired systems they didn't break. The rest of the galaxy was happy to let them play the role of the helper. But beneath that calm surface, something else was happening. Something only a few had begun to notice. There was an old ambassador from a distant system who once said, "Humans smile too easily." That's never just kindness and it's calculation. Few listened to him back then, but later, those words would come back to haunt them. One particular year, a massive meeting was held in the central chamber of the Galactic Council. The air was tense. A rising galactic threat had begun spreading across distant sectors, a coalition of aggressive worlds that refused to follow the Council's peace laws. Many planets had already fallen under their influence. The Council was desperate for allies and resources. When the discussion reached Earth's turn, the human representative stood up calmly. Everyone watched, expecting another speech about peace and friendship. The human bowed politely and said, "We believe in peace. We will continue our peaceful work." The words sounded as harmless as always. But this time there was silence afterward, not applause. Some of the powerful members grew frustrated. They wanted ships, weapons, soldiers. They wanted Earth to stop hiding behind its soft tone and join the fight. A tall, scaled ambassador from a warlike world raised his voice. "You humans always talk about peace," he said, "but you enjoy the safety we create with our weapons. How long will you hide behind your kindness?" The human envoy smiled slightly and replied, "We do not hide. We build, we heal. We believe that strength can look different." There was quiet laughter around the chamber. The other delegates whispered to one another. They thought the humans still didn't understand how dangerous the galaxy truly was. After all, what could Earth possibly do if attacked? They had no great army, no massive fleets, just goodwill and optimism. When the meeting ended, many left shaking their heads. A few even joked about how Earth would be the first to fall if war spread further. But those jokes didn't last long. Because within days of that meeting, small but curious things started happening across the galaxy. Trade ships that relied on human-built navigation suddenly began reporting errors. Medical stations using human-designed equipment noticed that their systems required rare components, all supplied only by Earth. The Council's data network, which had once been open to everyone, began to notice missing information from human satellites. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't even aggressive. It was subtle, quiet enough to seem like coincidence, but widespread enough to cause discomfort. When some Council members tried to reach out to Earth for updates, the responses were polite but vague. Messages came back saying things like, "We are currently focusing on internal matters," or "We are happy to assist soon." No one could accuse Earth of wrongdoing. But the timing felt strange. One senior official in the council finally said what others were beginning to think. Perhaps Earth isn't as harmless as we believed. Still, most brushed off the idea. How could the humans, small peace-loving humans, cause any real concern? They had always been friendly, always calm, always kind. But if one looked closely at history, a pattern could be seen. Every act of kindness from Earth had created quiet influence. The planets Earth helped rebuild now depended on their engineers. The species who received human medical technology now needed their supplies. The colonies that traded with humans relied on their goods to survive. Without ever threatening anyone, Earth had become necessary, and that realization, though few saw it yet, was the beginning of everything that would come later. In their homes and offices across the galaxy, council members continued their routines. They still saw humans as helpful and harmless, but small hints of unease began to spread. Some planetary leaders began checking how many of their systems were powered by human-made components. Others reviewed their communication networks and discovered they used Earth's algorithms. And somewhere in those quiet investigations, they began to see the same truth. Earth had been everywhere, involved in everything, all while acting humble and harmless. It was like realizing the quiet neighbor who always offered cookies also built half your house without telling you how the foundation worked. Yet, Earth's people remained the same in appearance, polite, cooperative, and endlessly kind. They continued to attend council meetings, still offering to help in every project. They still smiled when others mocked them. They still spoke about peace even as others spoke of war. And no one could accuse them of deceit. Nothing they had done was illegal or hidden. It was simply clever. The galaxy had always believed power came from armies, ships, and force. But Earth had built a new kind of power, one that didn't need weapons. A power that came from trust, connection, and quiet dependence. Still, the realization hadn't fully arrived yet. The Council would not truly understand the scale of what Earth had done until much later. For now, the humans were still the nice ones. The ones who stayed calm in every storm. The ones who smiled even when insulted. But the smile, that patient, confident human smile, was not what it seemed. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't innocence. It was the look of someone who already knew the ending of a story, while everyone else was still reading the first page. And on that quiet day, as the council meeting ended, and the delegates returned to their planets, no one realized that the galaxy had already begun to shift, not through war or invasion, but through something much simpler and far more powerful. Kindness. Earth had mastered it, and used it better than any weapon ever could. That day would be remembered, though no one knew it yet, as the beginning of a lesson that would shake the entire galaxy. Never underestimate the ones who choose to be kind. Because sometimes kindness isn't a weakness, it's a strategy, and Earth had been playing it longer than anyone realized. After the last council meeting ended, most members returned to their home planets thinking nothing had changed. To them, Earth's answer had been the same as always, calm, polite, and a little frustrating. But for a few members of the council, something about that short reply kept echoing in their minds. The human had said they preferred peace, and yet there had been something unshakable behind those words, a tone that didn't sound like fear. It almost sounded like quiet confidence. Weeks passed, and the galaxy grew busier. The council prepared for a new summit to discuss the growing threat along the outer sectors, a rising alliance of planets that refused to obey the council's peace laws. Trade routes were being cut off, colonies were turning silent, and more systems were joining the rebellion every month. The council's high chamber, a massive ring-shaped hall floating above a white-blue planet, was soon filled again. Delegates from across the galaxy arrived with their aides, translators, and data screens. Everyone expected a long, heated meeting, but this time all eyes turned toward Earth. The chairperson of the council, an elder being with silver skin and glowing eyes, spoke first. The situation is becoming unstable. We need to strengthen the defense lines. Every member world must increase its contribution. One by one, the delegates agreed. Some promised fleets, others offered weapons or supplies. Then came Earth's turn. The human envoy stood up, dressed in the simple gray uniform of their home planet. Their face was calm, hands folded. Earth, they said, believes that peace must remain our first path. The room fell silent for a moment. Then a few chuckles spread. The same words again, peace. Always peace, but the envoy didn't seem bothered. They continued, "We will not send weapons or troops. We believe this conflict will burn itself out once greed loses its purpose. However, we will continue humanitarian aid to affected systems." A delegate from a warrior planet slammed his hand on the table. "You can't fight war with food and kindness," he shouted. "This is the time for strength, not sympathy." The human's voice remained soft. "Peace is strength," they replied simply. The argument went on for hours. Eventually, Earth's decision was accepted, though with irritation. The Council couldn't force them. Every planet had the right to choose how to contribute. And so the meeting ended. But something strange began to happen soon after that. Within days, the trade routes connected to Earth quietly shifted. Cargo ships that usually moved between human colonies and Council outposts started traveling in new directions, away from the war zones. The flow of supplies that had kept several Council stations running began to slow. At first, no one noticed. Then, when a large supply station reported missing parts for its reactors, parts made only on Earth, questions began to rise. The station sent an urgent message to the Council. "We can't continue operations without Earth's materials." Similar messages came from other places. Colonies that depended on Earth's food shipments began to ration supplies. Medical centers using human-made nanotech reported delays. None of these problems were disastrous, but together, they started to cause worry. When the Council asked Earth for an explanation, the humans sent a calm response. "Our transport network is undergoing reorganization. Deliveries will resume soon." It sounded reasonable. It sounded honest. But the timing felt odd. A few Council members began investigating quietly. They noticed that while Earth's shipments to the Council had slowed, deliveries to small independent colonies, ones that had no political ties, had increased. The humans weren't stopping their help. They were just choosing who to help. That realization unsettled many. For so long, Earth had been considered harmless because it followed orders, signed every treaty, and never demanded anything in return. But now it looked like Earth was acting on its own terms, still peacefully yet independently. A senior analyst from the Council presented a secret report a week later. It said that almost 35% of the Council's vital technology came from human engineers. Everything from communication arrays to life support systems had some connection to Earth's research. Even the Council's own main translation system, the one that allowed hundreds of species to speak to one another, was based on human code. That fact had never felt threatening before. But now it did. If Earth ever decided to stop sharing, the entire network could slow or even collapse. It wasn't a weapon, but it was power. A quiet kind of power that no one had paid attention to before. Inside the Council halls, unease grew. At the next meeting, the tone was different. The same Warrior World delegate who once mocked Earth now spoke carefully. "Perhaps," he said, "we should invite Earth to lead the humanitarian efforts. Their influence in that field is unmatched." Others agreed. Some even suggested giving Earth more authority over aid distribution. On the surface, it sounded like respect. But beneath it, there was fear. Fear of losing what they needed most. The human envoy, as usual, accepted politely. "We are happy to serve," they said with a slight bow. But when they smiled, some of the older delegates exchanged quiet looks. They had begun to sense it. Earth's niceness wasn't weakness. It was control. Still, no one dared say it aloud. Weeks later, the Council requested another favor from Earth, this time to provide more communication satellites to replace damaged ones. The humans agreed instantly, but suggested that they would design a new, more efficient system. They promised it would make interplanetary contact smoother and faster. The Council approved without hesitation. The new system was installed within months, and it worked beautifully. Every transmission became clearer, travel routes became safer, and trade improved. Everyone praised Earth for their generosity, but buried deep in the system's code was something no one but the humans understood. The entire communication network was now built using an Earth-developed protocol, one only they could fully maintain. It wasn't done out of malice. Earth never demanded payment or control, but they now held a key no one else possessed. Back on Earth, people went about their lives as usual. Farmers tending to their fields, scientists researching clean energy, and students learning about the stars. The planet seemed as peaceful as it had always been. Yet somewhere under that calm surface, human leaders were watching carefully. They knew what the Council was beginning to realize. Peace was a stronger shield than any fleet of warships. They didn't need to fight to be respected. They only needed to keep being indispensable. In time, more small incidents began to surface. A colony near the edge of Council space faced a severe power failure. No one could fix it, except for a team of human engineers who solved it within hours. When the colony's governor asked how they managed it so easily, the humans just smiled and said, "We built the system, so we understand it." Word of that incident spread. Other colonies started to wonder how much of their infrastructure had Earth's fingerprints on it. The answer, it turned out, was almost everything. It wasn't planned as domination. It had simply happened naturally over decades of collaboration, generosity, and trust. But now, everyone began to see what that really meant. During the next major session, the Council's mood was tense. Delegates whispered among themselves before the meeting even began. Some wanted to demand that Earth share all its technological secrets. Others argued that such a move would break the fragile peace. When the human envoy arrived, they noticed the change in atmosphere immediately. Yet, as always, they smiled warmly and greeted everyone with kindness. They even brought gifts, new data tools, and energy samples. Throughout the discussion, many delegates avoided looking directly at them. It wasn't out of dislike. It was out of growing respect and a touch of fear. By the end of that meeting, the Council officially declared Earth as the central coordinator for peaceful development. It sounded like an honorary title, but everyone knew what it meant. Earth was now quietly at the heart of the galaxy's progress, and they had earned it not by force but by patience. When the human envoy returned home, the world celebrated. But on the Council's central planet, a quiet conversation took place between two senior officials. One asked, "Do you think Earth planned this all along?" The other replied softly, "If they did, then they've played the longest and smartest game in history." Outside the window, the stars shone quietly, millions of them, scattered across the dark. Somewhere among them, Earth glowed like a small blue spark, still kind, still smiling, still polite. But now, the galaxy had started to understand that behind that politeness was a strength no weapon could defeat. The power of calm minds, steady hands, and a patience that could move entire worlds. The humans hadn't changed at all. They were still helping, still building, still peaceful, but they were no longer underestimated. And the Council, for the first time, began to look at Earth not as a small and harmless world, but as a planet that had mastered the art of being nice, so well that it had quietly become the center of everything. Weeks had passed since Earth had been given the new title of Central Coordinator for Peaceful Development. To many across the galaxy, it sounded like a small honor, just another award for a planet known for being too gentle and too kind. But inside the Galactic Council, something was changing quietly. It started with a feeling, a strange kind of unease. For years, most delegates had barely paid attention to Earth's small group of representatives. They came to meetings, spoke politely, and left without causing problems. But now everyone seemed to notice them. Whenever the human envoy walked through the halls, conversations stopped. People watched. Some even pretended not to. It wasn't fear exactly. It was curiosity, mixed with the slow realization that maybe, just maybe, Earth wasn't as harmless as everyone had believed. Reports began arriving from different corners of the galaxy. A colony on the edge of Council space had lost power after a meteor storm. The engineers called for help, but none of the Council's repair teams could fix the system. Finally, they asked Earth for assistance. A small human crew arrived within a day, and within hours, the colony was back online. When the colony's director asked how they fixed it so quickly, one of the human engineers smiled and said, "It's easy when you built the system yourself." That single sentence spread through the Council's networks faster than any news. People started realizing how many of their machines, their life support systems, and even their ships had been built using human technology. The realization was small at first, but it grew louder with every new report. On one planet, factories stopped working because their energy cores were designed by human scientists. On another, a communication tower went offline and no one could repair it without Earth's software keys. These weren't acts of sabotage. It was just the way things had developed over time. Humanity had become the quiet builder behind almost everything that kept the galaxy running, but most council members hadn't noticed it until now. Soon, the meetings became more tense. Delegates started asking questions about trade routes, about supply lines, about Earth's role in maintaining the galaxy's technology. The human envoy answered each question calmly and politely, never defensive, never arrogant. One delegate asked, "Do you realize how much we depend on your systems?" The envoy smiled gently. "We believe in cooperation," they said. "Everything we share is meant to help everyone thrive." It was a perfect answer. Too perfect. The council tried to convince itself that Earth's intentions were pure. After all, the humans had never shown aggression, never made demands, never used their influence unfairly. But still, a quiet voice inside every mind whispered the same thought. What if they wanted to? One evening, the council's main chamber was nearly empty. Only a few senior members remained, talking privately. One of them spoke softly. "Have you ever noticed how every time Earth gives us something, it also becomes something we can't replace without them?" The others stayed silent. They had noticed it too. Meanwhile, on Earth, life went on as usual. The planet was peaceful. Its cities were green, its oceans calm. News stations spoke proudly about how humanity had been recognized as a leading force for peace. But behind those cheerful stories, leaders from different human nations were meeting in quiet rooms, studying the galaxy's response carefully. They weren't plotting domination or war. They were planning protection, and protection through influence. Earth had seen too many empires rise and fall through violence. Humanity had learned through its own long history that kindness could achieve what weapons could not. Back at the council, however, small changes kept happening. Ships that once carried council cargo now operated under joint Earth contracts. Navigation systems were updated with human-designed software. Energy grids across dozens of planets were switched to Earth-standard safety systems. Every change made life easier. Every update made things safer. And every update tied the galaxy a little more closely to Earth. The turning point came when a small planet named Fira 7 faced a crisis. Its air filtration system failed, threatening millions of lives. The council sent teams immediately, but nothing worked. Then Earth offered to send help, quietly, without asking for attention. Within a single day, the system was fixed. When the council praised Earth publicly, the human representative only said, "We're happy to serve." It sounded sincere. It probably was. But that phrase, "happy to serve," started to take on a different meaning, because slowly everyone began to realize Earth never asked for anything in return. No payment, no power, no land, no political favors, and that made them impossible to argue with. How could you distrust someone who only wanted to help? But deep down, the other worlds began to see the pattern. Earth's kindness had built dependency. Their peace had built loyalty. Their generosity had built quiet control. A rumor started spreading that Earth's leadership was not as simple as it looked, that behind the calm smiles and polite speeches, there was a group that had been planning this all along, not as a takeover, but as a safeguard, a way to ensure that no one could ever destroy humanity again, not through fear, but through need. Some called it clever. Some called it dangerous. The Council's intelligence division even began studying human history to understand their mindset. They found centuries of stories about survival, about rebuilding after wars, about rising stronger each time they were underestimated. One report concluded, humans do not seek to rule by force. They seek to shape by trust. It was an observation that both comforted and terrified the Council. In the following weeks, more worlds reached out to Earth directly, bypassing the Council. They wanted help with farming, trade, technology, medicine. Earth accepted every request, working day and night, sending teams to every corner of the galaxy. At first, the Council thought this was good, peace spreading faster than ever before. But when they noticed that even the outer colonies, far from the Council's control, began using human communication systems, they realized the truth. Earth was building something larger than the Council itself, a network of trust that didn't rely on laws or threats, and all of it was happening without a single shot fired. During the next council session, tension filled the air. One delegate from a proud industrial planet finally spoke what many were thinking. Maybe Earth's kindness isn't just kindness, he said. Maybe it's strategy. The human envoy didn't deny it. They only smiled and said, "If peace is a strategy, then we are proud to use it." No one could argue with that. After the meeting, many delegates left with heavy thoughts. They had spent centuries believing strength came from power, from ships, weapons, and armies. But now they saw a different kind of strength, one that didn't need destruction to win. Earth had changed the rules without telling anyone. On distant planets, workers spoke fondly of human engineers. Children learned Earth's languages in school because they were easier to use for science. Hospitals played soft Earth music to calm patients. Everywhere, small traces of humanity spread, not as a takeover, but as a presence. And the Council realized something both humbling and frightening. Earth hadn't forced its way into the center of the galaxy. The galaxy had invited them in. The unease grew stronger. No one could point to anything Earth had done wrong, yet everyone felt the balance shifting. Power wasn't in the hands of the strongest anymore. It was in the hands of the most trusted. That night, one of the oldest council members stared out into space from their quarters, watching Earth's small blue light from afar. They whispered quietly, "Maybe we misunderstood them. Maybe all this time they weren't acting nice because they were weak. Maybe they were being nice because they didn't need to be anything else." In that moment, the truth began to settle. The Council had always seen peace as the absence of power, but now they saw peace as the purest form of it. Earth had never asked to lead Minomo, but somehow, everyone was following their example. And while the galaxy buzzed with gossip, theories and doubts, humans continued to do what they always did: help, build, smile, and move forward. No arrogance, no threats, no demands, just quiet progress. Yet under that calm surface, even the friendliest council members began to ask themselves a difficult question. If one day, Earth decided to stop helping, what would happen to all of us? No one had the answer, but everyone knew one thing. From that day on, they could never again look at Earth the same way. The planet they once called too kind had become something far greater, a power that led not through fear but through faith. And that perhaps was the most powerful thing of all. Rumors had started spreading like quiet winds through the great halls of the Galactic Council. No one could prove anything, yet everyone seemed to have a story about Earth. Some said humans had been planning their rise for decades. Others claimed it was just luck, that their kindness had accidentally turned into power. Whatever the truth was, one thing had become clear: nothing in the galaxy moved without Earth's touch anymore. At first, people tried to ignore it. They told themselves that Earth's influence was harmless. After all, humans had never once used their advantage to harm anyone. They didn't threaten, they didn't demand, and they didn't act superior. If anything, they seemed almost shy about how much the galaxy needed them. But soon, small cracks began to show. One morning, an intelligence report was quietly circulated among senior council members. The report had no title, only a short line at the top that read, "For internal review only." Inside, it detailed something the Council had never noticed before: the hidden pattern behind Earth's goodwill. According to the data, every major humanitarian project Earth had led over the past 50 years had two outcomes: peace and dependence. The planets they helped were always grateful, always loyal, but they also became completely reliant on Earth's technology, medicine, or food supply. It wasn't done through trickery, and it happened naturally. But the effect was the same. No one could stand fully without Earth's support. The report ended with a quiet warning: if Earth ever withdraws, half the Council systems will collapse within one cycle. That single sentence sent a wave of unease through the Council. For days, meetings were held behind closed doors. The delegates argued in whispers. Some said the report was exaggerated. Others said it was the truth the Council didn't want to face. And through it all, Earth remained silent. The humans didn't respond to the gossip or the panic. They simply kept working, smiling, and helping, as if unaware of the growing storm. But the calmness only made things more suspicious. Eventually, someone decided to dig deeper. The Council approved a quiet investigation into Earth's activities. Not an attack, just observation. Analysts began studying trade records, communication data, and diplomatic messages. What they found shocked even the skeptics. Earth's kindness wasn't random. Every action they took had a purpose. When they sent aid to a planet, that planet soon became a trade partner. When they shared technology, they also provided the maintenance crews. When they helped rebuild a colony, they trained the local engineers, who later preferred to keep using Earth's methods instead of the Council's. Piece by piece, humanity had built a web, not of control but of connection. And the more connections they made, the stronger they became. The Council called for an emergency session. The chamber was filled to capacity. Representatives from every known system attended, their voices echoing through the vast hall. The chairperson began the meeting with a heavy tone. It seems we have underestimated one of our own members. The room buzzed instantly. Everyone knew who they meant. When Earth's envoy arrived, they looked calm as ever. Dressed simply, carrying no visible signs of power, they walked to their usual seat. The entire room turned toward them. One delegate finally stood and said, "Is it true? Have you built your influence through planned strategy?" The human looked around the chamber for a long moment before answering. "We have only done what we said we would, help others, share knowledge, and promote peace." The delegate pressed on. "But every planet you help becomes dependent on you. Every system you build relies on your support. That cannot be coincidence." The human's expression didn't change. "Dependence is not forced," they said softly. "It is trust, and trust must be earned." The answer left the room silent. Another delegate, frustrated, leaned forward. "You speak of trust, but trust gives power. Do you deny that your planet now holds more influence than the Council itself?" The human paused for a moment, then said, "If influence means the galaxy no longer chooses war, then we accept that responsibility." No one spoke after that. For the first time, the Council saw the quiet truth behind Earth's smile. The humans had never hidden their intentions. They had just spoken them so simply that no one believed them. They truly wanted peace, but they had also learned how to make peace unbreakable by becoming essential to everyone who desired it. After the meeting, small groups of delegates gathered in private corners, whispering. Some felt anger, others admiration. A few even felt relief, because deep down they knew that if anyone was going to hold quiet power, it was better in the hands of those who sought harmony than in the hands of those who sought control. Outside the Council chambers, life across the galaxy went on as usual. Ships flew, trade continued, and Earth's projects expanded. But something had changed in the way people spoke about humanity. The jokes about them being too soft disappeared. No one mocked their peaceful speeches anymore. Now, when a human envoy entered a room, everyone fell silent, not out of fear but out of respect. Still, there were those who couldn't accept it. Some members of the Council believed that Earth had become too powerful, even if unintentionally. They started secret discussions about limiting human influence, controlling their trade, reducing their access to certain systems. But every attempt to act against Earth quietly failed. When one planet tried to replace human-made systems with their own, production stopped within weeks. The workers demanded to bring back the old technology because it was safer and easier to use. When another world tried to block human trade routes, their neighboring systems protested because they depended on those routes for survival. It became clear that Earth's influence wasn't something that could be undone, because it wasn't built on force. It was built on trust and usefulness. One observer described it perfectly. "You can fight against power, but not against kindness, because kindness wins people's hearts, and once you have that, control is unnecessary." Meanwhile, back on Earth, the people were hardly aware of how powerful their planet had become. They still saw themselves as one small world in a big galaxy. They continued to work on cleaner energy, faster ships, and better medicines. They didn't brag about their success because to them helping others was normal, not a strategy. But the human leaders knew exactly what was happening. They had learned from history that peace had to be protected not only by words but by influence. As long as the galaxy needed Earth, no one would ever dare to destroy it. And so, they continued their work quietly, knowing that every act of kindness made them safer. Back in the Council, a smaller group of wise members began to see the situation differently. Instead of worrying, they decided to learn from Earth. They studied how humans built cooperation through simple gestures, fairness in trade, honesty in diplomacy, and empathy in communication. Slowly, they began to follow the same path. Within a few years, disputes that once took decades to solve were being settled peacefully. The Earth method, as some called it, became the new standard. One day, a new council member, young and curious, asked an elder, "Why do we listen to Earth so much? They don't threaten us. They don't even demand anything." The elder smiled gently and said, "That's exactly why we listen. Power that doesn't shout is the hardest kind to resist." Those words captured the truth of everything that had happened. The council, once filled with pride and conflict, had been humbled by a small world that taught them a different way to lead. And though some still doubted, most began to understand that Earth's kindness wasn't a mask or a trap. It was a reflection of strength that didn't need to prove itself. By the end of that cycle, Earth's reputation had changed completely. They were no longer the kind planet. They were the example everyone quietly wanted to follow. Their smile, once seen as weakness, was now recognized for what it truly was: confidence built on compassion. And while the galaxy continued to spin and grow, one truth settled deep into the hearts of those who understood history best. The greatest power isn't in fear. It isn't in control. It's in the ability to be trusted, even when others doubt you. That was the truth behind Earth's smile. It wasn't a strategy to win. It was a way to never lose. And the day the council realized that, the galaxy changed forever. The days after the big council meeting felt strangely quiet. The galaxy wasn't the same anymore. Everyone had seen what Earth truly was, and not weak, not naive, but quietly powerful. Yet that understanding didn't bring peace to the council chambers. It brought tension. Behind closed doors, new conversations began. Some members admired Earth's strength, saying it had saved the galaxy from endless wars. Others, however, felt threatened. They whispered that no planet should ever hold that much silent control. Rumors spread again, only this time they carried fear instead of curiosity. Some delegates said Earth's kindness was a shield, a way to hide their long-term plan to take over everything. Others disagreed and said humans were incapable of such ambition, that they were simply different, maybe even too hopeful for their own good. Amid all this confusion, a special meeting was called, one that would change everything. It was known as the Meeting of Clarity. The council hall was filled long before the session began. Reporters floated near the ceiling platforms, ready to capture every word. Representatives from dozens of systems sat stiffly, their faces unreadable. Even the air felt heavy. Everyone knew what the meeting was really about: the future of Earth's place in the galaxy. When the human envoy entered, the room fell silent again, just like before. But this time the silence wasn't cold. It was watchful, cautious, but curious. The envoy walked slowly to their seat, greeted a few allies politely, and waited for the chairperson to begin. The chairperson stood, their voice echoing through the grand hall. "We have gathered here today," they said, "to discuss what has become the most complex question of our time. Earth's influence grows with each passing cycle. It is not through war or threat, but through cooperation and innovation. Still, the Council must decide. Does this influence protect the galaxy or endanger it?" A soft murmur spread through the crowd. Everyone knew this would not be an easy discussion. One delegate from a system that had long relied on Earth's technology stood first. "We owe our survival to Earth," they said firmly. "When our crops failed, they shared food. When our atmosphere weakened, they gave us energy systems that saved our people. How can kindness be a threat?" Applause followed. But the next speaker from a different world had a colder tone. "Kindness can still lead to control," they said. "We are not talking about their hearts, we are talking about balance. No planet should hold so many threads of dependence. If Earth sneezes, half our systems will catch a fever." The statement drew quiet nods. All eyes turned to the human envoy, but they remained calm, waiting for their turn. They didn't interrupt, didn't argue. That patience itself made some delegates uneasy. A third speaker, older and wiser, rose next. "Perhaps the problem is not Earth," they said thoughtfully, "but us. We have allowed convenience to replace responsibility. We accepted help without learning to sustain ourselves. Earth didn't chain us, and we tied the knots by our own hands." The room fell silent at that. Those words struck deeper than most speeches could. When it was finally time for the human envoy to speak, everyone leaned forward. The envoy stood slowly, their eyes scanning the hall. "We did not come here to defend our planet," they began gently. "We came to understand your concerns. If our help has made anyone feel powerless, that was never our intent. We wanted to heal, not to control. But perhaps we gave too much, and in doing so we made others forget their own strength. Their voice carried warmth, not arrogance. The words flowed like a quiet river, steady, calm, but filled with meaning. The envoy continued, "We have learned something important too. True peace cannot exist if it only depends on one planet. So if this council decides that we should step back, we will respect that. But we hope you will not see kindness as weakness, or because the moment kindness disappears, fear will return." The chamber went still. The delegates didn't know how to respond. There were no threats, no arguments, only honesty. For a few long minutes, no one spoke. You could almost hear the hum of the energy lights above. Then a delegate from a distant system stood and said softly, "You speak of peace as if it is something that can survive without control. But peace often needs power to protect it. What will you do if others begin to fear your power and turn against you?" The human envoy smiled faintly. "Then we will continue what we always do. We'll try to understand them. Fear doesn't need to be crushed. It needs to be listened to." That simple answer spread through the room like light breaking through clouds. Suddenly the conversation began to shift. Delegates who had come prepared to accuse began asking questions instead. How did Earth maintain its balance? How did they ensure cooperation without manipulation? How did they turn peace into something practical? The envoy answered each question with patience. They explained how Earth never entered a deal without fairness. Every planet they helped was invited to contribute something, even if small. They explained how they shared technology openly, so that no one would feel tricked. They explained how they never asked for loyalty, only partnership. By the time they finished speaking, the hall no longer felt tense. The mood had softened. Even those who doubted Earth began to understand that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a plan to dominate the galaxy. It was something bigger, a new way of living together. After a long silence, the chairperson asked one final question. "If Earth holds so much influence," they said carefully, "what will you do with it?" The envoy looked thoughtful before replying. "Influence is like fire. It can warm or it can burn. We will use it to keep others warm. That's our choice." The hall erupted in quiet murmurs again. Some were deeply moved. Others still struggled to accept it. But one thing was clear. Earth wasn't just another planet anymore. They had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a leader without claiming leadership. When the meeting ended, no vote was taken. No resolution was passed. But everyone knew what had happened. The council for the first time had listened, truly listened, and what they heard had shaken them more than any weapon ever could. Outside the chambers, reporters rushed to transmit the highlights across the stars. Within hours, every colony, every outpost, every system knew what Earth had said. The words, "We will keep others warm," became a quiet symbol of hope. People started talking differently. The fear that had once surrounded Earth began to fade. Even those who had doubted them started to admire their steady calm. But not everyone was ready to accept it. In the darker corners of the galaxy, a few powerful groups saw the new respect Earth was gaining, and they didn't like it. They began plotting ways to undermine them, to break the trust they had built. Yet Earth didn't respond with anger. They simply kept helping, kept building, kept smiling. They understood something the others didn't. Fear fades faster than hatred, and love lasts longer than control. In the months that followed, more planets joined projects led by Earth. Education programs, clean energy systems, medical research, all expanding under the idea that peace could be practical, not just poetic. The Council slowly began to adopt Earth's ways. Meetings became calmer. Disputes were handled through cooperation instead of threats. And somewhere deep down, everyone knew that the shift had begun the moment the Council realized Earth had been acting nice not as a trick, but as a choice. That day, the galaxy took its first real step toward a future where power didn't come from who had the biggest fleet, but from who had the deepest trust. And as the Council members left the Great Hall that evening, one thing stayed on their minds: the quiet strength of a planet that never needed to raise its voice to be heard. Because sometimes, the loudest change begins in silence, and that silence belonged to Earth. The galaxy had grown quiet in the months after the Great Meeting. For the first time in many generations, there were no wars, no trade blockades, and no political shouting matches in the council chambers. It felt strange, almost too peaceful. Ships still crossed the stars, carrying supplies, technology, and news between worlds. Markets bustled. Children learned about new cultures, and explorers mapped unknown regions. But beneath all that calm, something deeper was happening. The galaxy was slowly beginning to understand. They were beginning to understand Earth. At first, everyone had thought the humans were just lucky, fortunate travelers from a small blue planet who happened to rise at the right time. But as peace continued to grow stronger, people started to see the truth. Earth's power hadn't come from technology or strategy. It had come from something simpler, something older. Choice. Humans had chosen kindness. Even when they didn't have to. They had chosen cooperation, even when they could have taken control, and that choice had changed everything. In the council headquarters, a new meeting was called. It wasn't an emergency session this time, nor a debate. It was something different, something softer. They called it the reflection gathering. Every representative was invited to speak not about politics, but about what they had learned from Earth's example. The large hall was filled again, but this time there was no tension in the air. No one came to argue or accuse. They came to listen. The first speaker was a delegate from a small mining colony. They spoke about how Earth had helped them rebuild after an accident destroyed half their facilities. They didn't ask for anything in return, the delegate said. They only asked that we pass it forward when we could help someone else. And we did. Now we send aid to 2 nearby colonies every season. That's how change begins. One act leading to another. The crowd nodded quietly. The next speaker was from a distant system that had once refused Earth's help out of pride. They had believed they didn't need it. But Earth never held it against us, the delegate said. They waited. When we were finally ready, they didn't say, "We told you so." They simply smiled and said, "Let's start fresh." That humility taught us more than any treaty ever could. As more representatives spoke, a pattern began to appear. Each story, no matter how different, carried the same truth. Earth never forced anyone to follow them, yet everyone ended up walking in their direction anyway. Not because they were pushed, but because they wanted to. When it was finally Earth's turn to speak, the envoy stood slowly, almost shyly. The chamber went still again. "We never wanted to lead," the envoy said softly. "We only wanted to survive. And along the way we realized something, that the only way to survive in a big, unpredictable galaxy is to make sure others survive too." The words were simple, but they carried weight. They continued. "Our world has made mistakes. We've fought, we've hurt, we've learned. That's why we understand pain when we see it in others. Maybe that's why we tried so hard to help. Not because we are better, but because we know what it's like to break, and how hard it is to heal alone." Many delegates bowed their heads quietly. The truth in those words touched something human in every species, no matter how different they looked or spoke. The envoy added, "We didn't come here to be remembered as heroes or saviors. We only want to prove that peace can work, that trust can be stronger than fear. And maybe if we keep believing that, others will too." Then they smiled, the same gentle, genuine smile that had confused the galaxy for so long. But now everyone finally understood it. That smile wasn't strategy. It was strength. After the meeting, there was no official decision or grand ceremony. There didn't need to be one. The message was already clear. The Council didn't need to control Earth, and Earth didn't need to prove itself anymore. What followed was something historians would later call the Quiet Revolution. Planets began forming small alliances not for power, but for cooperation. Instead of competing, they started sharing resources, knowledge, and culture. Trade became fairer, science advanced faster, borders began to mean less, and shared goals began to mean more. And everywhere, people quoted the same simple words that had started it all. Kindness is not weakness. It became the motto of a new era. Even in far-off colonies where Earth's name was spoken only through stories, children grew up learning that peace wasn't something fragile. It was something that could be built brick by brick through patience and empathy. But not everything was perfect. There were still those who doubted, who whispered that peace couldn't last forever. Some believed that Earth's quiet influence would fade over time, and maybe they were right, at least about part of it, because Earth didn't want to rule forever. Once the galaxy was stable, they began to step back, slowly, carefully. letting others take charge. They wanted the council to stand on its own, to learn how to keep the balance without their constant help. And that's when the real test began. When Earth finally stopped attending some of the smaller council meetings, a strange thing happened. Instead of falling apart, the council kept working smoothly. Disputes were resolved through talks instead of threats. New policies were created with fairness in mind. It was as if humanity's influence had become part of the galaxy's nature, woven into its culture forever. A young historian from a distant system later said, "Earth didn't lead by force. They led by example. And examples don't disappear when the leader leaves, they live on in others." Back on Earth, life moved quietly. People still worked, studied, explored, and dreamed. They didn't see themselves as legends or as the galaxy's guardians. They were just doing what they had always done, trying to be better than yesterday. But in space, among the stars, the effect of that attitude still glowed like a gentle light. Ships carrying the Earth emblem were always welcomed with smiles. Their arrival meant safety, fairness, and hope. Even in places where no law reached, the idea of Earth's kindness carried weight. It became a story told to young travelers. Once, there was a small world that chose to be kind when it could have been cruel. And because of that, the galaxy learned peace. As years passed, generations changed and technology evolved. The Council never forgot the moment they realized what Earth had truly done. It wasn't about dominance. It wasn't about politics. It was about teaching the hardest lesson the universe had ever learned. That real strength doesn't shout, it whispers. One quiet evening, as the Council observed the blue planet through their orbital station, a delegate whispered to another, "Do you think Earth knew this would happen?" The other delegate smiled faintly. "No," they said. "They just did what felt right." The rest followed on its own. Down on the planet, people looked up at the stars as they always had, wondering what the future would bring. They didn't know that the galaxy now looked back at them with admiration. They didn't know they had become the example everyone quietly followed. But maybe they didn't need to know. Because the beauty of true kindness is that it doesn't need recognition. It just keeps moving forward, creating light wherever it goes. And so the galaxy kept spinning, calm, connected, and wiser than before. The Council continued to meet, not to argue, but to share ideas. Disagreements still happened, of course, but now they were settled with understanding instead of fear. The story of Earth became part of every world's history books. Not as a tale of conquest, but as a reminder of what can happen when compassion becomes stronger than pride. And in the end, the final words written about that age were simple. They thought Earth was just acting nice. But it turned out they were showing the galaxy how to be human.